Hejun stared at his computer screen until his eyes hurt. The numbers and equations that usually made perfect sense now seemed to mock him. He had been working on this quantum propulsion theory for 3 years at the Seoul Advanced Research Institute, and something still wasn't right. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of his laboratory, casting long shadows across the empty desks. Most of his colleagues had gone home hours ago, but Hejun couldn't leave. Not when he was so close to a breakthrough. "You should go home," said a familiar voice. Yu Jin, his research partner, stood in the doorway with her lab coat draped over her arm. "The equations will still be here tomorrow." Hejun rubbed his tired eyes. "Just one more hour. I think I'm onto something with the quantum field calculations." Yu Jin shook her head but smiled. She had known Hejun since university, and his dedication to science hadn't changed since then. "Don't forget to eat something. Your brain needs food to work." After she left, Hejun returned to his calculations. The theory was simple. If they could understand how particles move through quantum fields, they might be able to create a new kind of engine. An engine that could push spacecraft faster than anyone thought possible. The clock on the wall showed 9:30 p.m. when the first tremor shook the building. Hejun grabbed his desk as his coffee cup rattled. Earthquakes weren't common in Seoul, but they happened sometimes. Then the second tremor came, stronger than the first. This time, the lights flickered. He stood up and walked to the window. The research institute sat on top of a hill, giving him a clear view of the city below. Everything looked normal, except a bright light appeared in the sky, getting larger by the second. At first, Hejun thought it was a plane, but it moved too quickly and too smoothly. The light grew until it was directly above the institute's courtyard. Then it stopped. Hejun's mouth fell open as he watched a ship, because that's what it had to be, slowly descend from the sky. It was beautiful, like liquid silver poured into the shape of a teardrop. No seams, no rivets, no signs of how it was built. Just smooth, flowing metal that seemed to catch and reflect every color around it. The ship landed without a sound in the middle of the courtyard. It was about the size of a small bus, but its design made it look lighter than air. Hejun realized he had been holding his breath and forced himself to breathe. Security alarms began blaring throughout the building. Red lights flashed in the hallways. Hejun heard people running and shouting, but he couldn't look away from the ship. A section of its side began to change, the metal flowing like water until it formed an opening. Light spilled out from inside, and a figure appeared. Hejun's first thought was that she looked almost human. Almost, but not quite. The woman who stepped out of the ship walked with a grace that seemed impossible, as if gravity affected her differently. Her skin had a subtle shimmer to it, like mother of pearl in sunlight. But it was her eyes that made Hejun's heart skip a beat. They were deep purple and seemed to hold tiny points of light, like a night sky full of stars. She wore simple clothing, a white suit that looked like it was made from a single piece of fabric, with no visible fasteners or seams. The thin circle of silver sat on her head, a crown, Hejun realized with surprise. Security guards burst into the courtyard, guns drawn. The woman didn't seem worried. She raised her hand, and all the weapons simply fell apart, their pieces dropping harmlessly to the ground. "I mean no harm," she said in perfect Korean. Her voice was musical, with an accent Hejun couldn't place. "I am Princess Myre of the Stellar Empire of Avalon. I have come to speak with Hejun." Hejun's legs felt weak. She had come to speak with him. Why? He was just a physicist working on theories that might never work. More people arrived in the courtyard: police, government officials, and military personnel. They formed a circle around the princess, but kept their distance after seeing what happened to the guards' weapons. "Hejun," the princess called out, looking directly up at his window. "Would you please come down? We have much to discuss." He noticed she hadn't used any title or honorific with his name. In Korean culture, that usually meant either great disrespect or great intimacy. Somehow, coming from her, it felt natural. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Government agents escorted Hejun down to the courtyard. Someone gave him a microphone and an earpiece. He could hear people talking rapidly in the background. Military commanders, scientists, and politicians all trying to figure out what to do. "Just keep her talking," the voice said in his ear. "We need to understand why she's here." Hejun stepped forward. Up close, Princess Mireille was even more striking. She smiled at him, and he felt as if he were the only person in the world. "Hejun," she said, "I have been watching your work with great interest. Your theories about quantum field manipulation are closer to the truth than you know." He blinked in surprise. "You know about my research. We have been monitoring Earth's scientific progress for many years. Your species is young, but you think in ways that are unique." She took a step closer. "That is why I am here. I have an offer for you." The voice in Hejun's ear told him to be careful, but he couldn't help asking, "What kind of offer?" "I would like you to return with me to Avalon," Mireille said. "Not as a guest or a researcher, but as my partner on the throne." The courtyard fell silent. Even the voices in Hejun's earpiece stopped. I don't understand," he said. "Why me?" Mireille's star-filled eyes seemed to look right through him. "Because you see patterns that others miss. Because you ask questions that others don't think to ask. Because you might be exactly what my people need." "And what do your people need?" "A different perspective. New ways of thinking." She gestured at the ship behind her. "We have built wonders, Hejun. We have mastered energy and matter, space and time. But sometimes the simplest problems elude us. We need someone who can think differently." Hejun's mind raced. This had to be a dream. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Alien princesses didn't just show up and offer to make someone their co-ruler. "This is a serious decision," Mireille continued. "I understand if you need time to think about it. But know that if you accept, you will have access to technology and knowledge beyond anything on Earth. You could help advance human science by centuries." The voice in Hejun's ear came back to life. "Ask her about their intentions toward Earth. Ask about their military capabilities." But before Hejun could speak, Mireille smiled again. "Your leaders are worried about our intentions. They should know that we have no interest in conquest. Earth is under the protection of the Avalonian Empire, not as a subject, but as a developing civilization with great potential." She reached into a pocket and pulled out what looked like a small crystal. "This contains information about our civilization, enough to prove who we are, and that we mean no harm. Your scientists can study it. I will return in 3 days for your answer." Mireille handed him the crystal. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with a soft inner light. Then she turned and walked back to her ship, the opening reformed behind her, the metal flowing like water until it was seamless again. The ship rose silently into the air. There was a flash of light, and it was gone, leaving Hejun standing in the courtyard holding a piece of alien technology and wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. But the crystal in his hand was real. And so was the choice he had to make. Over the next 3 days, Hejun's life became chaos. Government officials questioned him for hours. Scientists studied the crystal, which contained detailed information about Avalonian history and technology, enough to prove they were real, but not enough to replicate their advanced systems. Yujin visited him at the secure facility where he was being kept. "You're not really considering this, are you?" she asked. "It could be a trap." "But what if it's not?" Hejun looked out the window at the city lights below. "Think about what we could learn. Think about how we could help humanity advance. Or think about how you might never see Earth again." Yujin countered. "We know nothing about these aliens except what they've chosen to tell us." Hejun picked up the crystal, watching the lights swirl inside it. "I spent my whole life trying to understand the universe. Now the universe has come to my doorstep. How can I say no?" On the 3rd day, Princess Mireille's ship returned. This time, world leaders and news crews were waiting. The whole planet watched as Hojun walked toward the ship, carrying only a small bag of personal belongings. Mayray stood in the ship's opening, holding out her hand. "Have you made your decision?" Hojun took a deep breath. Behind him was everything he had ever known. His home, his family, his research. Ahead was an adventure beyond imagination. He took her hand. Her skin was warm, and he could feel a subtle vibration, like standing near a powerful engine. "Yes," he said, "I accept your offer." Mayray's smile lit up her face, and for a moment, her eyes blazed with starlight. "Welcome, Hojun, to the beginning of your new life." As they entered the ship together, Hojun couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. But then the door closed behind them, and Earth began to fall away below, and all he could think about was the incredible journey ahead. He didn't notice the look that passed between Mayray and her pilot, or the way her smile held just a touch of sadness. Those details would only become important much later, when he finally understood why an alien princess had chosen him to share her throne. The inside of the Avalonian ship looked nothing like Hojun had imagined. Instead of metal walls and control panels, the interior seemed alive. Soft light pulsed through what looked like veins in the walls, and the floor adjusted to each step he took, making him feel weightless. "This is biological technology," Princess Mireille explained, noticing his wonder. "Our ships are grown, not built. They are alive in their own way." The pilot's area had no visible controls. A young Avalonian man sat in what looked like a comfortable chair, his hands resting on smooth surfaces that rippled like water. When he turned to greet them, Hojun noticed his eyes held the same starlight as Mireille's, though his were silver instead of purple. "This is Kaiho, our pilot," Mayray said. "He has guided my ship for over 200 years. Hojun's mouth fell open. 200 years. But he looks so young. Kaiho smiled. "Our people age differently than humans. The princess herself is over 500 years old." Mireille led Hojun to a viewing area where the walls became transparent. Earth was already shrinking below them, a beautiful blue marble in the darkness of space. Hojun felt a lump in his throat as he watched his homeworld grow smaller. "How long will the journey take?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 3 days, Mayray replied. "Though we could make it in minutes if we wanted to. I thought you might like a gentler introduction to space travel, and it will give us time to talk." The ship had comfortable living quarters for Hojun, with a bed that adjusted to his body and walls that could show any scene he wanted. He spent hours watching Earth fade into the distance, then looking at the stars in ways no human had ever seen them before. Mireille visited often, asking him questions about Earth and human society. She seemed especially interested in how humans solved problems. "Tell me," she said during their second day of travel, "how did humans learn to farm?" The question seemed strange to Hojun. Surely an advanced civilization knew about agriculture. "Well, our ancestors noticed that seeds from their food grew into new plants. They started planting them on purpose and found ways to make them grow better." Mayray's eyes lit up with interest. Such a simple observation, yet it changed your entire species. "Do you know, we never thought of that. When we needed food, we changed our bodies to need less of it. The idea of changing plants to make more food, it would not have occurred to us." Hojun frowned. "But that seems like the obvious solution." "Obvious to you," Mayray said softly. "That is why we need you." Before Hojun could ask what she meant, the ship's interior pulsed with new colors. Kaiho's voice came from somewhere in the walls. "Princess, we're approaching the Avalonian border. The greeting ships are coming to escort us." Hojun rushed to the viewing area. 6 ships, each larger than Mayray's, appeared around them. They looked like giant sea creatures made of light and metal, gracefully dancing through space. "Your honor guard?" he asked. Mireille nodded. "And protection. Though we have no enemies, space can be dangerous. There are things out here that even we don't understand." The next day, Hejun woke to find the ship's walls showing a spectacular sight. A star system with 3 suns filled the view. Around the smallest sun orbited a planet that seemed to be made of crystal and light. "Welcome to Avalon," Mayray said proudly. As they got closer, Hejun saw that the planet's surface was covered in structures that looked like they had grown from the ground. Towers spiraled up into the sky, connected by bridges that appeared to be made of solid light. The whole planet glowed with a soft, pearl-like shine. "Our atmosphere is similar to Earth's," Mayray explained as they descended. "We've adjusted it slightly to make you more comfortable. You'll find you can breathe easily here." They landed in what Hejun could only describe as a living garden. The landing pad was surrounded by plants that moved with obvious intelligence, their flowers turning to watch the ship land. The air smelled sweet, like spring flowers and ocean breeze mixed together. A group of Avalonians waited for them. They all had the same shimmering skin and star-filled eyes as Mayray, though in different colors. They wore flowing clothes that seemed to change color with every movement. An older-looking Avalonian stepped forward and bowed. "Welcome home, Princess, and welcome to you, Hejun of Earth. I am Du-hyun, Chief Advisor to the throne." Hejun noticed that Du-hyun's eyes were deep gold, and they seemed to hold more stars than the others. When the advisor looked at him, Hejun felt like he was being studied down to his atoms. "The palace has been prepared for you," Du-hyun continued. "We have created living quarters that should match your Earth preferences, though with some of our improvements." As they walked through the city, Hejun couldn't stop staring at everything. The buildings seemed to breathe. Roads appeared under their feet as they walked and disappeared behind them. Vehicles that looked like soap bubbles floated silently through the air. But something felt odd. Despite all the amazing technology, Hejun noticed that many simple tasks were done in surprisingly complicated ways. He watched an Avalonian spend several minutes using a high-tech tool to open what looked like a simple door. "Why not just use a handle?" he asked quietly. Mayray looked at him with interest. "What do you mean?" "Well, instead of using energy to make the door respond to that tool, you could just attach a piece of metal that pulls it open." The princess's eyes widened. "Show me." Hejun picked up a nearby piece of metal and quickly sketched a basic door handle design. The Avalonians gathered around, watching with intense fascination as he explained the simple mechanics. "Remarkable," Du-hyun said. "Such an elegant solution. We would have continued making more and more complex opening devices, never thinking to try something so basic." They reached the palace, which looked like a mountain made of crystal and light. Inside, Hejun found his quarters were a perfect blend of Earth comfort and Avalonian technology. The bed was like the one on the ship. The walls could become windows showing any view he wanted, and the temperature adjusted automatically to his preference. But he couldn't stop thinking about the door handle incident. Why would such an advanced civilization be amazed by something so simple? And why did they need him, really? That evening, Hejun stood on his balcony, looking out at the 3 suns setting in sequence, painting the sky in impossible colors. Mayray joined him, wearing a formal dress that seemed to be made of starlight. "Tomorrow," she said, "we begin your preparation for the partnership ceremony. You will learn our ways, our history, our culture. But tonight, I want you to tell me more about how humans solve problems." "What kind of problems?" "Any kind. All kinds. We find human creativity fascinating." Hejun spent hours telling her about simple human inventions: the wheel, the lever, the pulley. With each example, Mayray's eyes grew brighter with interest. But sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, he caught a glimpse of something else in her expression. Was it worry? Sadness? Guilt? As he prepared for bed that night, Hejun remembered Yu-jin's warning about not knowing enough about these aliens. The Avalonians had shown him wonders beyond imagination, but they were also hiding something. He could feel it. Looking out at the alien city glowing under the light of 3 moons, Hejun made a decision. He would accept their hospitality and learn everything he could. But he would also watch carefully and try to understand what wasn't being said. Because one thing was becoming clear. The Avalonians needed him for something specific. And until he knew what that something was, he couldn't fully trust their beautiful princess or her wonderful world of living technology. In his dreams that night, Hejun saw Yujin standing in his laboratory back on Earth, pointing at his equations and trying to tell him something important. But in the dream, like in reality, he couldn't quite understand what he was missing. The morning of Hejun's coronation began with 3 sunrises, each painting the sky in different colors. He stood at his window, watching the light change from gold to pink to deep purple. His new formal clothes felt strange against his skin. They were made from a living fabric that adjusted its temperature and fit perfectly to his body. "Are you ready?" Mayre's voice came from his doorway. She wore a dress that looked like it was made from captured starlight, and her crown seemed to float above her head. "I'm nervous," Hejun admitted. "I still don't fully understand what I'm supposed to do as your throne partner." Mayre walked over and took his hand. Her skin felt warm, with that slight vibration he had noticed before. "Just be yourself. That's exactly what we need." The coronation took place in a grand hall that seemed to have no roof. The ceiling was open to the sky, with energy fields keeping the atmosphere in place. Thousands of Avalonians filled the space, their star-filled eyes all fixed on Hejun as he walked down the central aisle. Do-hyun stood at the front of the hall, holding what looked like a living crown. Unlike Mayre's silver circlet, this one was made of a pearly material that moved and shifted like liquid metal. "People of Avalon." Do-hyun's voice carried effortlessly through the vast space. "Today we welcome a new partner to our throne. From the young world of Earth, Hejun brings fresh eyes and new wisdom to our ancient civilization." As Hejun knelt before Do-hyun, he noticed something odd. In the walls of the hall were what looked like windows, but they showed not the outside world but rather faces. Hundreds of faces of different species. Some looked almost human, others were completely alien. All had the same earnest, searching expression. Before he could ask about them, Do-hyun placed the living crown on his head. The material felt cool at first, then warm as it adjusted to him. Hejun felt a slight tingling sensation, as if the crown was trying to connect with his thoughts. "Rise," Mayre said, holding out her hand. "Rise and take your place beside me." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Hejun attended council meetings where the Avalonians discussed problems facing their empire. To his surprise, they seemed to value his opinion on every matter, no matter how small. "The farming colonies on our outer worlds are struggling," one council member reported. "The soil enrichment systems are becoming too complex to maintain." "Why not use crop rotation?" Hejun suggested. "On Earth, we learned that different plants can naturally add nutrients back to the soil." The council members looked at him with amazement, their star-filled eyes bright with interest. Mayre quickly ordered the implementation of his suggestion across all farming colonies. This pattern repeated itself often. The Avalonians would present a problem that they had tried to solve with increasingly complex technology, and Hejun would offer a simple solution that had been common knowledge on Earth for centuries. One evening, as Hejun walked through the palace gardens with Mayre, he finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "Why do your people have trouble with simple solutions? You have mastered space travel and biological technology, but basic mechanics seem to confuse you." Mayre was quiet for a long moment, watching the living flowers that turned to follow their movement. "Our evolution took a different path than yours," she finally said. "We developed great technological and biological capabilities, but we lost something along the way, something that your species still has." "What did you lose?" "The ability to think sideways, to see simple answers to complex problems. We can only think forward, making things more and more complex until they work." Hejun thought about this as they walked. It explained a lot about why they seemed to need his help with basic problems, but something still didn't feel right about the explanation. Later that night, Hejun decided to explore the palace library. The Avalonians had given him full access to their knowledge banks, but he preferred looking through physical records. As he walked through the quiet halls, he heard voices coming from a meeting room. "The integration is proceeding well," Du Hyun's voice said. "His solutions are exactly what we needed. But the connection isn't forming as quickly as with previous partners." Another voice responded. "The Crown should have established a stronger link by now." Hejun froze. What did they mean by connection and link? "Give it time." Myre's voice joined the conversation. "He is different from the others. His mind works in ways we didn't expect. We don't have much time, Princess. The degradation is accelerating. If we can't establish a proper connection soon." Hejun backed away quietly, his heart pounding. He made his way to the library, but instead of going to the main reading room, he went to a section he had noticed before but never explored: the historical records. After hours of searching, he found what he was looking for. Every few centuries, the Avalonian Empire had chosen partners from different civilizations. Each time, they selected someone who showed particular problem-solving abilities, and each time, that person's civilization had eventually joined the empire. But there was something strange about the records. They stopped tracking these partners after their coronations. It was as if they simply disappeared into the empire's history. Hejun remembered the faces he had seen in the walls during his coronation. Were those the previous partners? And what had happened to them? He was so absorbed in his research that he didn't notice Myre entering the library until she spoke. "You should be sleeping," she said softly. "Tomorrow's council meeting is important." Hejun looked up at her. In the dim light, her eyes seemed to hold more stars than usual, and there was something sad in her expression. "Myre," he said carefully, "what really happens to the throne partners?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to a window and looked out at the 3 moons of Avalon. "I care for you, Hejun," she finally said, "more than I expected to. That's why this is so difficult." "What's difficult? What aren't you telling me?" "Get some rest," she said, turning away. "Everything will become clear soon enough." That night, Hejun couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the conversation he had overheard, about the missing records of previous partners, about the faces in the walls. Something was happening that he didn't understand, something that involved him directly. As he lay in his bed, watching the living walls pulse with soft light, Hejun remembered something Yujin had said before he left Earth. "We know nothing about these aliens except what they've chosen to tell us." The crown on his bedside table caught his attention. In the darkness, he could see it moving slightly, like something trying to wake up. He reached out to touch it, and for a moment, he thought he heard whispers. Countless voices speaking together, trying to tell him something important. Hejun pulled his hand back quickly. Whatever was happening here, whatever the Avalonians really wanted from him, he needed to figure it out soon, because he was beginning to suspect that being a throne partner meant something very different from what he had been told. Outside his window, the 3 moons of Avalon cast their light over the crystal city, making it glow like a jewel in the darkness. But for the first time since his arrival, the beautiful sight filled Hejun not with wonder, but with a deep sense of unease. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came during a routine council meeting. Hejun sat beside Myre, listening to reports from various star systems, when an emergency message interrupted the proceedings. "Medical alert from the outer colonies," a breathless messenger announced. "The degradation has reached critical levels. 30% of the population is showing symptoms." The council chamber erupted in chaos. Hejun watched as the Avalonians' usual calm demeanor cracked. Their star-filled eyes flickered with fear, and their shimmering skin grew pale. "What degradation?" Hejun asked Myre. "What's happening?" Before she could answer, Du Hyun stepped forward. "We must tell him now, Princess. We have no choice." Myre nodded slowly, her eyes full of sadness. "Hejun, our people are dying. Not just in the outer colonies, but everywhere. Our minds are failing. Failing. How? We are losing our ability to think, Du Hyun explained. Not just the simple solutions that have always been hard for us, but everything. Our minds are becoming like empty stars, bright but lifeless. Hajun felt a chill run down his spine. Is that why you brought me here? To help find a cure? In a way, Mary said softly, but it's more complicated than that. Before she could continue, another messenger burst into the chamber. The degradation has reached the central city. Cases are appearing in the palace district. Hajun watched in horror as one of the council members suddenly stopped moving, their star-filled eyes going dark. Others rushed to help, but nothing they did seemed to make any difference. Take me to the Forbidden Hall, Hajun demanded, remembering the faces he had seen in the walls. Show me what really happens to the throne partners. Mireille and Du Hyun exchanged looks. Finally, Mireille nodded. It's time. They led him through corridors he had never seen before, deep into the heart of the palace. The walls here were different. They seemed to pulse with thought rather than just light. They stopped before a massive door that looked like it was made of living crystal. Mireille placed her hand on it, and it dissolved away. Inside, Hajun found himself in a vast, circular chamber. The walls were filled with what looked like windows, but he quickly realized they were actually screens, each showing a different face. Some looked human-like, others were completely alien, but all of them moved and seemed aware. These are all the previous throne partners, Mary said quietly. Their minds are still alive, still thinking, still helping us. Hajun stepped back in shock. You kept their minds. What happened to their bodies? We had no choice, Du Hyun said. Our species evolved to be perfect in many ways. We mastered technology. We learned to shape matter itself. We even conquered death. But we lost something crucial along the way. We lost the ability to think creatively, Mary continued. Our minds can only follow straight lines of thought. We can make things more complex, but we cannot think of new solutions. We cannot imagine new ways. Hajun looked at the faces in the walls. They were all watching him, their expressions full of understanding and sadness. Every few centuries, Du Hyun explained, we find a civilization that thinks differently than we do. We choose one of their best minds to join us, to help us see things in new ways. Their minds become part of our collective consciousness, helping us solve problems we could never solve alone. The crown, Hajun said, touching the living metal circlet on his head. It's supposed to connect my mind to yours. Mireille nodded. But you're different. Your mind. It resists the connection. That's never happened before. And now our people are dying faster than ever. And we don't know why. Suddenly, Hajun understood. It's because you're trying to think like us instead of fixing what's wrong with your own minds. You're using our creativity like a crutch instead of learning to think differently yourselves. The faces in the walls all turned to look at him. He could feel their attention, their interest in his words. Show me your medical data, Hajun demanded. Show me everything you know about the degradation. For the next several hours, Hajun studied the Avalonian medical records. He noticed something that their complex thinking had missed, a pattern so simple it was almost invisible to them. Your problem isn't that you can't think creatively, he finally said. It's that you're afraid to think simply. Every time you face a problem, you make the solution more and more complex. Your minds are burning out because you're forcing them to think in ways they weren't meant to. Can you help us? Mireille asked, her voice trembling. Hajun looked at her, then at the faces in the walls. Yes, but not by becoming another trapped mind in your collection. I'll help you learn to think differently, not by giving you my thoughts, but by teaching you to find your own solutions. Over the next few weeks, Hajun worked with the Avalonian scientists. He showed them how to break down complex problems into simple parts. He taught them to look for basic solutions before trying complex ones. Most importantly, he helped them understand that their way of thinking wasn't wrong. It just needed balance. The degradation began to slow, then stop. The Avalonians learned to combine their natural ability to think complexly with new, simpler ways of solving problems. But there was still one issue to resolve. What about them? Hajum asked, gesturing to the faces in the walls. The previous partners. Mayray looked troubled. We can't restore their bodies. Those were lost long ago. But you can free their minds, Hajum said. Let them rest. Let them go. You don't need them anymore. You need to learn to think for yourselves. It took time, but eventually the Avalonian Council agreed. One by one, the minds of the previous partners were released from their eternal service. Many had been trapped for thousands of years, helping the Avalonians think in ways they couldn't manage alone. As the last mind faded away, Mirai turned to Hujun. Will you stay? Not as a trapped mind, but as my true partner. Help us rebuild our civilization in a better way. Hajun thought about Earth, about his old life, about Eugen's warnings. Then he looked at Mirai and saw not just a beautiful alien princess, but someone who had been trying to save her people the only way she knew how. I'll stay, he said, but as an equal partner, not a solution to your problems. And we need to change how the Empire works. No more taking minds from other civilizations. No more shortcuts to creativity. Mayray smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, her star-filled eyes showed pure joy without any hidden sadness. Then let's build something new together, she said. Something that combines the best of both our worlds. Hajun took off his crown and placed it on a pedestal in the Hall of Minds. He wouldn't need it anymore. The Avalonians would learn to think differently on their own, and he would help them, not by giving them his mind, but by teaching them to use theirs in new ways. As he and Mayray left the hall together, the last lights of the preserved minds fading behind them, Hojun thought about how sometimes the biggest problems didn't need the most complex solutions. Sometimes they just needed someone to look at them differently. The three sons of Avalon set in sequence, painting the sky in impossible colors, and Hejun looked forward to helping build a future where simple and complex thoughts could exist together in harmony.